The human soldier woke up with pain in his chest. Smoke rose from the wreck of his small ship. Metal was broken, wires burned, and fire licked the edges of the broken wings. He coughed and pushed himself up, looking around. The planet was strange, with high cliffs, glowing lights inside caves, and mist rolling through the air. He did not know where he was, but one thing was clear: he was alive. His name was Marcus, a soldier of Earth. He had been lost in space after a battle. Now fate had thrown him here, on a world he did not know. He touched the cut on his forehead and felt the dry blood. The ship was useless. He could not fly again. He needed water, food, and a plan. As Marcus walked forward, he heard cries. At first he thought it was the wind, but then he heard screams, high, sharp, filled with fear. He crouched low and moved closer. Through the mist he saw something that shocked him. There was a group of tiny blue aliens, no taller than a child's waist. Their skin glowed faintly in the dark, their eyes wide with terror. They were running across a wooden bridge that stretched over a deep canyon. But behind them came larger creatures, tall, armored, with sharp weapons. The raiders shouted in a harsh language, swinging their blades. Marcus watched as one of the tiny aliens stumbled and fell. A young boy, his small arms covering his head. A raider raised his weapon to strike. Without thinking, Marcus moved. He sprinted forward, his boots pounding on the wooden planks. The raider turned too late. Marcus's fist slammed into his face, sending the creature flying. The bridge shook under the force. The tiny aliens gasped, staring at the giant human who had appeared from nowhere. "Run!" Marcus shouted, his voice booming. The small aliens obeyed, rushing past him. 3 more raiders came at him, swinging their jagged blades. Marcus grabbed one by the arm, twisted, and broke the weapon. He kicked another, sending him over the bridge into the canyon below. The last one tried to stab him, but Marcus grabbed the blade with his bare hand, blood running down his palm. He growled and pulled the weapon away, striking the raider with his own blade. The tiny aliens cheered, but their fear was not gone. More raiders were coming, their footsteps shaking the bridge. Marcus stood tall, his body broad and powerful compared to their slim frames. The raiders hesitated now, unsure if they wanted to fight the strange giant. For a moment there was silence. The mist swirled around the bridge. The sound of water rushing below filled the air. Marcus's chest rose and fell as he caught his breath. He looked at the tiny aliens behind him, their glowing blue eyes staring with hope and fear mixed together. He raised his bloody hand and pointed to the cliffs. "Go! Climb! Hide!" he said firmly. They nodded and hurried toward the safety of the caves. The raiders cursed and backed away, not ready to lose more of their fighters. One pointed at Marcus and shouted a warning before they vanished into the fog. Marcus stood alone, breathing hard. The bridge was cracked, broken in places, and blood stained the wood. He looked at his hand, the cut deep, but he felt no regret. He had saved lives, strangers, yes, but lives that deserved saving. The small aliens came back slowly, peeking from the rocks. One of them, an older male, with silver markings on his skin, stepped forward. He bowed his head, his voice trembling. "You saved us." Marcus nodded, too tired to speak much. The small alien children looked at him like he was a mountain that had come alive. Some whispered, others hid behind their elders. Marcus saw both fear and awe in their faces. He did not know what they would do with him. He did not know if they would trust him or cast him out. But one thing was certain. His life had just changed forever. He was no longer alone on this planet. The blue-skinned people gathered around him. They whispered in their language, pointing at his size, his strength, his wounds. Finally, the elder raised his hand. "Come with us," he said in broken human speech. Marcus frowned, surprised they knew even a little of his tongue. Still he followed. As they led him into the caves, torches flickered on the walls. The air was warm, the stone paths carved by many hands over many years. Marcus felt eyes watching from the shadows. Dozens, maybe hundreds of the tiny aliens hidden inside. The deeper he went, the louder the whispers grew. Who was this giant? Why did he help us? Is he a savior or a danger? Marcus walked silently, his boots echoing against the stone. He did not know the answers himself, but he could feel it in the air. This was only the beginning. Something greater was waiting for him, and in the darkness of the alien caves, unseen, eyes glowed brighter. The chief had already heard the news. The human who defended the tiny ones had arrived, and the chief was preparing a decision that would shock Marcus even more. The cave opened into a hidden world. Marcus stopped in surprise. Before him stretched a wide cavern glowing with blue crystals in the walls. Tiny homes were built inside the rock, stacked high like miniature towers. Bridges and ladders connected them, glowing lanterns swaying gently in the air. The small aliens gathered everywhere. They were no taller than his knees or waist, each one glowing faintly in the dark. Their eyes widened as they saw the human enter. Whispers spread like fire across the cavern. Too big, too strong, dangerous, some said. Others whispered, savior, protector, gift from the stars. Marcus felt their stares pressing on him from every direction. Children pointed at his huge arms and heavy boots. Mothers pulled their little ones close. Elders narrowed their glowing eyes, cautious and silent. He followed the silver-marked elder deeper inside. The elder walked with dignity. Though his steps were small, Marcus noticed how the tiny people bowed as the elder passed. He must be someone. Important, a leader perhaps. At the center of the cavern stood a raised stone platform. Torches burned bright on each side. The elder climbed up and raised his hand. The noise of the crowd fell silent. Every eye turned toward Marcus. This is the human, the elder announced in his deep, echoing voice. He fought the raiders and saved our children. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some looked thankful. Others, fearful. Marcus stood tall, unsure of what to do. His head almost touched the cavern ceiling. He felt like a giant trapped in a world made for ants. He tried to soften his expression, not wanting to scare them more. The elder continued, He has great strength, but we do not know his heart. He turned to Marcus and spoke slowly, his words broken but clear. Why did you fight for us? You could have run. Marcus looked at the crowd. He saw the children he had saved hiding behind their parents. He remembered the boy who had fallen on the bridge. If he had not acted, that boy would be dead. He clenched his fists and answered, simply, because it was right. The words echoed in the cavern. The aliens tilted their heads. They had expected something else. Fear, demand, bargain. But instead, the giant human spoke of right and wrong. A murmur spread through the people. Some nodded, others frowned. The elder studied Marcus with sharp eyes. This answer made him curious. He raised his hand again, silencing the whispers. You will meet the chief, the elder declared. The crowd gasped. Even Marcus felt the tension in the air. The chief, whoever he was, seemed to be more than just a leader. There was respect and fear in the way the name was spoken. The elder led Marcus down a carved tunnel. The crowd stayed behind, though their glowing eyes followed until he disappeared into the shadows. The air grew warmer, and the walls were lined with carvings, scenes of battles, hunts, and ceremonies. Marcus saw drawings of small warriors fighting massive beasts. He admired their bravery, even though their size seemed so small against such monsters. Finally, they entered a great chamber. It was larger than the first cavern. With a throne of stone at the far end, on that throne sat the chief. He was taller than the others, though still only reaching Marcus's chest. His skin was deep blue, his hair silver, and his armor shone with polished crystal. Around him stood guards with sharp spears that glowed faintly. The chief's eyes locked on Marcus, calm but sharp. The silence stretched long. Marcus stood firm, his shadow covering the ground before the throne. At last the chief spoke. You are not of our kind, he said in a stronger, clearer voice than the others. You fell from the sky, yet you risked your life for my people. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Why? Marcus felt the weight of the question. The chief was not just asking for an answer, he was testing his soul. Marcus spoke slowly, his voice steady. Because no one should be left to die when someone can stand and fight. The chief's eyes narrowed, then softened. He sat back on his throne, silent for a moment. Finally, he nodded once. "Then you are not enemy," he said firmly. The guards lowered their spears. Relief passed through Marcus, but only for a moment. Because the chief was not finished, he raised his hand, and the chamber filled with the sound of drums from the shadows. More of the tiny people stepped forward. They chanted softly, bowing before the chief. The chief looked at Marcus again. "You have strength greater than any of us," he said. "Strength can protect, but it can also destroy." His tone grew heavier. "So we must decide, will you be guest or will you be one of us?" Marcus frowned, confused. "One of you?" he asked. The chief's lips curled in a mysterious smile. "Yes," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "To join us is to share our lives, our bonds, our ways." Marcus felt a chill run down. His spine, the way the chief spoke, made him uneasy. What did "join us" truly mean? He had no answer, only questions. The chief rose from his throne, his eyes glowing bright in the torchlight. He pointed his staff at Marcus. "You saved us," the chief declared, "and for that you must be honored." The guards struck their spears on the ground in rhythm. The chanting grew louder, echoing off the stone walls. Marcus stood in the middle of the chamber, towering over them all. But for the first time, he felt small, not in size, but in understanding. He had stepped into a world he did not know. A world with rules, secrets, and traditions that were about to change his life forever. And as the drums beat faster, he realized one thing. Whatever the chief planned for him, it was not simple. It was something that would leave him shocked beyond belief. The drums slowed, then stopped. Silence filled the great chamber. The chief stood tall on his throne, his glowing staff in hand. All eyes were on Marcus, the strange human who had fought for the tiny blue people. The chief's voice was calm but carried great weight. "You saved our children, you saved our tribe, you showed strength," he said. "But strength without loyalty is dangerous." He stepped closer, his eyes sharp and calculating. "You must not only live with us but become one of us." Marcus's brows tightened. He had expected thanks, maybe food, or a place to rest, but these words carried a deeper meaning. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice steady but cautious. The chief did not answer right away. Instead, he turned to his people, raising his hand. The crowd cheered, their tiny voices echoing through the cavern. Marcus felt uneasy, like he had stepped into something larger than himself. The chief finally spoke again. "In our law, when a stranger proves himself, he cannot remain a stranger." He tapped his staff on the stone floor, sparks glowing from its crystal tip. "He must be bound to us, heart, spirit, and life." Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. Bound? What did that mean? The people around him looked excited, some smiling, others whispering eagerly. The guards stood firm, their glowing spears crossed behind him. It was clear, this was not a request. It was a decision already made. The chief pointed at Marcus. "You will join our tribe," he said firmly. "You will not walk as a giant alone, but as family." The crowd erupted in cheers. The sound filled Marcus's ears, bouncing off the cavern walls, but Marcus was not celebrating. He looked around, trying to understand. Family, bonds, loyalty. These were words heavy with meaning. And yet he did not fully understand what the chief had planned. The elder with silver markings stepped forward. He bowed to the chief and then turned to Marcus. "It is honor," he said softly. "It means you are chosen. You are trusted." His eyes, however, showed something deeper, something Marcus could not read. The chief raised his staff again. "Tomorrow," he declared, "there will be a ceremony." The cavern shook with cheers. Marcus stood frozen. A ceremony. For what? The chief did not explain further. Instead, he waved his hand, dismissing the crowd. The people bowed and began to leave the chamber, still whispering with excitement. The guards lowered their spears, but kept a close eye on Marcus. The elder stepped closer and spoke quietly. Rest now, human. Tomorrow you will understand. Marcus wanted to protest, to demand answers, but his body ached from the crash and the fight. He was led to a small chamber carved into the rock. A bed of soft moss and glowing crystals lit the walls. The tiny aliens who guided him bowed before leaving. Closing the stone door, Marcus sat down, his mind restless. He replayed the chief's words in his head. Bound to us. Heart, spirit, and life. What did that mean? Was it a test of loyalty? A ritual? A trap? He clenched his fists, staring at the faint glow of the crystals. He had survived war, space, and enemies. But here, in this hidden world of tiny people, he felt lost. Not because of danger, but because of the unknown. Hours passed. He heard faint songs and drums in the distance. The tribe was preparing. Excitement filled the air, but Marcus felt only tension. He lay back, staring at the rocky ceiling. Sleep finally came, but not peacefully. His dreams were filled with blue eyes staring at him, and voices chanting his name. The next day came too quickly. The stone door opened and the silver-marked elder entered. "Come," he said. Marcus rose, his body still sore but his mind sharp. He followed the elder through twisting tunnels until they reached the main cavern again. This time it was decorated with banners of crystal and cloth. Torches burned brighter. Drums beat in rhythm. The people were gathered in hundreds, their glowing bodies lighting up the darkness like stars. At the center stood the chief, his staff raised high. Marcus walked forward, every step echoing like thunder. The people bowed as he passed. He felt their small eyes on him, full of both fear and hope. He reached the platform where the chief waited. The chief raised his voice. "Today, we welcome the human who fought for us," he declared. "He will no longer be stranger, he will be one of us." The crowd cheered, the sound shaking the cavern. Marcus's heart pounded. He did not understand what was about to happen, but he could feel it. Something big, something life-changing. The chief lowered his staff and looked straight at him. "You will be given a bond," he said, his voice calm but powerful. "A bond that ties you to us forever." Marcus felt his breath catch. The crowd cheered louder. He wanted to ask what that meant, but the words stuck in his throat. The chief's eyes glowed brighter. "Tonight, you will receive what no outsider has ever received." The drums grew louder, the chanting rose. Marcus stood in the center, surrounded by a sea of glowing eyes. He had defended these people, and now they had chosen him for something he could not yet understand, but deep in his chest he knew this. Whatever the chief had decided, it would change everything, and Marcus would not leave this place the same man who had entered. The cavern was alive with sound. Drums thundered, voices rose in chants, and the glowing lights of the crystals danced on the walls. Marcus stood at the center of the gathering, his heart heavy with questions. The chief's words from last night echoed in his mind. A bond that ties you to us forever. The tiny blue people filled every ledge, bridge, and balcony carved into the stone. They stared at the giant human, their faces filled with excitement, curiosity, and wonder. Marcus felt the weight of their eyes pressing on him. He had fought for them, saved them, but now he was about to face something he did not understand. The chief stood on the high platform, his staff glowing in the torchlight. He raised his hand and silence fell. His voice echoed strong and steady. "Today, the human becomes one of us." The people cheered, stomping their small feet against the rock. The ground trembled beneath. The rhythm. Marcus's stomach tightened. He wanted to know, what was this bond, what was this ceremony? But no answer came yet, only suspense. The chief motioned and 2 guards stepped forward, carrying a small box carved from shining crystal. They placed it on the platform before the chief. When he opened it, a soft blue glow filled the chamber. Inside lay a delicate crown woven of silver threads and tiny gems. The chief lifted the crown high. "This crown is not only for honor," he said. "It is a sign of unity, of family, of trust." He lowered it slowly, placing it at Marcus's feet. "By wearing this, he accepts our bond." Marcus stared at the crown, his jaw tight. He understood now. This was no simple thank you. This was a demand to join their tribe forever. Still, he bent down and picked up the crown. The crowd erupted with cheers as he placed it on his head. But the chief was not finished. He raised his staff again, his eyes glowing brighter. To seal the bond, he must be given more than a crown, he declared. He must be given family. Marcus froze. The crowd fell silent, waiting. Then from the shadows a small figure stepped forward. A girl, no taller than Marcus's thigh, her skin glowing faintly blue. Her long hair was silver, braided with tiny flowers. She wore a simple, white garment, and her hands trembled as she walked. Marcus's breath caught in his chest. She looked young, shy. Her eyes lowered as she stepped to the chief. The chief placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and turned her toward Marcus. "This is Lyra," he said, his voice calm but firm. "She is of my people, and she will be your bond, your partner, your wife." The cavern filled with gasps. Some cheered, some clapped, others whispered. Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him. Wife?" he repeated in disbelief. The chief nodded. "Yes, a wife, as our law demands. For no man fights only for strangers, he fights for family." Marcus stood stunned, his mind spinning. He had fought battles, faced death, survived war, but nothing had prepared him for this. A wife, tiny, fragile, alien, and chosen for him. He looked at Lyra, who lifted her eyes just enough to meet his gaze. Her eyes were bright, uncertain, but not afraid. There was a quiet strength in her. Though her body was small, the crowd began to chant, "Bond, bond, bond!" Their voices shook the cavern walls. The chief raised his staff and declared, "With this union, he is no longer outsider. With this bond, he is one of us." Marcus's throat felt dry. He wanted to speak, to say this was a mistake. But he saw the faces of the people, hope, joy, relief. They were not forcing him as an enemy. They were giving him a place among them. To refuse would mean rejecting everything he had fought for, and perhaps rejecting their trust. Lyra stepped closer, her small hands holding a glowing crystal. She offered it to Marcus, her voice soft, but clear. "This is for you," she said. Her words were trembling, but her eyes met his without fear. Marcus reached down, his massive hand dwarfing hers. He took the crystal gently, careful not to crush it. The crowd roared in approval. The chief lowered his staff and smiled. "It is done," he said. "Now the human is bound to us." Marcus stood in silence, the crown on his head, the crystal in his hand, the tiny girl before him. His heart pounded as the truth sank in. He was no longer just a visitor. He had been given a family, a wife, a role he never expected. The people celebrated, drums beating louder, voices rising higher. Food and fire filled the cavern with warmth. Children danced, elders sang, and the chief watched with pride. But Marcus did not celebrate. He sat in the corner, his eyes fixed on the little girl who was now called his wife. Lyra sat near him, quiet, her hands folded in her lap. She did not speak, but every so often she looked at him with curious eyes. He wondered what she thought, what she felt. He wondered if she was as shocked as he was. The night wore on, the tribe feasted and celebrated. But Marcus could not shake the question in his mind. Why had they given him a wife? Was it truly to honor him? Or was there another reason, hidden behind their smiles? As the fire burned low, the chief approached once more. He looked at Marcus, his voice low so only he could hear. "Now you understand," he said. "You are not only a fighter, you are family, and family never leaves." Marcus's eyes narrowed. There was meaning in those words that went deeper than ceremony. He was not free anymore. He was bound. And as he looked again at Lyra, sitting quietly with her glowing blue skin and silver hair, he realized his life had just changed forever. He was no longer just a protector. He was something more, but whether this was a blessing or a trap, he did not yet know. The fire in the great cavern burned low. The tribe's celebration was ending. laughter and chants fading into silence. Marcus sat against the stone wall, his back aching, his mind restless. The crown still rested on his head, the glowing crystal in his hand, and beside him sat Lyra, the tiny girl now called his wife. He glanced at her, unsure what to say. She was small, delicate, her silver hair glowing faintly in the torchlight. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her eyes lowered. She seemed calm, yet Marcus could see the faint tremble in her fingers. He cleared his throat, his deep voice echoing too loudly in the quiet space. I don't understand this," he said softly. Lyra lifted her eyes for a moment, then lowered them again. "It is our way," she answered, her voice gentle. "When one is chosen, they must be joined." Marcus frowned. "Joined? But I never asked for this." Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line, but she did not argue. Her silence made him feel even heavier. He leaned his head back against the stone wall, staring at the glowing ceiling. His thoughts spun. He had fought for these people because it was right, but now they had tied him to their tribe with chains of tradition. Not iron chains, but something far more binding. Family. The chief's words echoed in his mind. Family never leaves. Was this marriage truly a gift? Or was it a way to make sure he stayed? Marcus looked at Lyra again. She was watching him now, quiet but curious. Her eyes were not filled with fear, only uncertainty. He realized she was just as caught in this bond as he was. Perhaps she had not chosen this either. He softened his tone. "Did you want this?" he asked. Lyra hesitated, then shook her head slightly. "It is not for me to choose," she whispered. "My chief commands, and I obey." Her words struck Marcus like a blade. She had no freedom, no voice in this. Just like him, she was bound by the chief's will. For the first time since the ceremony, Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not anger, but pity. They were both prisoners of tradition. The following days were filled with tension. The tribe treated Marcus with honor, giving him food, water, and shelter. Wherever he walked, the tiny people bowed or whispered. Children followed him with wide eyes. Some even laughed, trying to copy his long strides with their tiny legs. To them, he was a hero. But to Marcus, the weight of his new role pressed harder. Each day, Lyra walked beside him, often quiet but present. She carried small baskets of fruit or guided him through narrow tunnels. Though she was shy, she spoke more now. She explained their customs, their songs, their food. She even laughed once when Marcus struggled to sit on a chair built for someone her size. Her laughter was soft, like a bell. For a moment, Marcus forgot the strangeness of it all. But at night, when the cavern grew dark, the struggle returned. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The question burned inside him. Was this truly his life now? Could he accept being bound to a people he barely knew? Could he accept being given a wife who never chose him? One evening, he decided to ask the chief. He stood before the stone throne, his voice steady but firm. "I did not come here to take a wife," he said. "I fought because it was right, not because I wanted reward." The chief listened, his Giwa face unreadable. When Marcus finished, the chief rose slowly. His voice was calm but carried iron. "You do not understand," he said. "This is not reward. This is protection." Marcus frowned. "Protection? For who?" The chief's eyes glowed as he answered. "For us, and for you." He stepped closer, his voice low. "If you fight only as a stranger, one day you will leave. But if you fight as family, you will never abandon us." He placed a hand on Marcus's arm. "Now you will fight not only for our tribe, but for her." Marcus stiffened. He understood the chief's meaning now. By giving him a wife, they had given him a reason to stay. A reason to fight for them even when he wanted to leave. The realization sank like stone in his chest. He had been trapped, not by force, but by duty. The chief had bound his heart through Lyra. That night, Marcus sat with Lyra again. She looked at him with quiet eyes. "You are angry," she said softly. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Not at you," he replied. Just, at all of this. Lyra lowered her gaze, her voice almost a whisper. I know. I did not choose either. Her honesty cut through his anger. For the first time, Marcus felt a connection with her, not as wife and husband, but as two souls caught in the same chain. But before he could say more, a horn echoed through the cavern, loud, sharp, urgent. The tribe froze, their glowing eyes wide with fear. The chief's voice rang out, "The raiders return." Marcus rose to his feet, his fists clenching. The struggle inside him burned away, replaced by purpose. Wife or no wife, bond or no bond. These people were under attack, and he would not stand aside. As the drums of war began to beat, Marcus realized something deeper. He was not just fighting for strangers anymore, he was fighting for her, for Lyra. And for the first time, that thought filled him with strength. The horn echoed through the caverns, its sharp cry shook the stone walls and sent fear racing through the tribe. Mothers pulled their children close. Elders shouted warnings and warriors rushed for their weapons. The glowing lights of the crystals flickered as the drums of alarm began to beat. Marcus stood tall in the center, his fists clenched. The chief's voice rang out across the cavern. "The raiders return." The people gasped in unison, their glowing eyes filled with dread. Lyra's small hand gripped Marcus's arm. Her touch was light, almost trembling. "They come again," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They will not stop until we are gone." Marcus's jaw tightened. He had fought them once before on the bridge. But this time he could feel it. There were more, far more. The ground beneath them already trembled with heavy footsteps from outside. The chief raised his staff. "Warriors, prepare. Defend the tunnels, defend the children." Dozens of tiny fighters rushed forward, their glowing spears in hand. But Marcus looked at them and felt a cold truth. These warriors were brave, but they were too small. Against the armored raiders, they would not last long. Marcus stepped forward, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "I will fight." The tribe turned to look at him, their eyes wide with both hope and fear. The chief nodded slowly. "You are our giant, you must lead." Marcus took a spear from one of the warriors, but the weapon was no bigger than a stick in his massive hand. He dropped it and instead gripped a broken metal beam he had carried from his crashed ship. It was heavy, sharp at one end and long enough to swing like a sword. It would have to do. The ground shook harder now, the sounds of the raiders' war cries echoing from the tunnels. The smell of smoke and fire filled the air. Marcus's heart pounded, but his mind was sharp. He looked at Lyra, who stood beside him with fear in her glowing eyes. "Stay behind me," he said firmly. But Lyra shook her head. "I will help," she whispered, clutching a small crystal dagger. Marcus wanted to argue, but there was no time. The first wave of raiders stormed into the cavern. Tall, armored, their jagged weapons gleaming, they roared in victory before the battle even began. But then they saw Marcus, the giant human standing in their path. Their roars turned into shouts of rage. Marcus charged, his beam of metal swinging with crushing force. The first raider fell with a broken chest. The second was knocked clear across the cavern. The tiny warriors cheered, their voices high and sharp. But more raiders poured in, dozens, maybe hundreds. The cavern shook with their steps, the battle exploded. The tiny fighters darted between, the raiders' legs stabbing with glowing spears. The raiders swung their heavy blades, scattering them. Marcus fought like a storm, his strikes heavy, his roar echoing louder than the drums. He grabbed one raider and slammed him into the ground, snapping the stone beneath. Another charged at him, but Marcus spun the beam like a club, shattering the raider's helmet. Still, for every enemy that fell, more appeared. The tribe was being pushed back. Marcus's body ached, his wounds from before tearing open, blood running down his arm. But he did not stop. He could not stop. Lyra stayed close, her small form darting between rocks. She used her dagger not to fight head-on, but to cut ropes that raiders used or throw sharp stones to distract them. At one moment, a raider lifted his blade over Marcus's back. Before Marcus could turn, Lyra leapt forward, stabbing the raider's hand. He howled in pain and dropped the weapon, giving Marcus the chance to finish him. Marcus looked at her in shock. She was trembling, but she stood her ground. "You said protect me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I will protect you too." The word struck deep into Marcus's chest. For the first time, he understood the bond was not only a chain, it was also strength. He was not fighting alone. The battle raged on, the cavern filled with screams and smoke. Marcus's arms grew heavy, but his rage kept him moving. He fought not just for the tribe, but for Lyra. Every time he looked at her, standing small yet brave, his strikes grew harder, stronger, faster. Finally, after what felt like endless hours, the raiders began to retreat. Their bodies littered the stone floor, their leaders calling for retreat one by one. They disappeared back into the tunnels, their roars fading into silence. The cavern fell quiet except for the ragged breaths of the survivors. The tribe began to cheer, weak at first, then louder. They had survived. They had driven back the raiders. Marcus stood in the center, his chest heaving, his body covered in blood and dirt. He dropped the broken metal beam with a loud clang. His eyes found Lyra, who stood with her dagger still in hand, her body trembling from exhaustion. She looked up at him, her silver hair messy, her glowing eyes filled with relief. "You fought for us," she whispered. Marcus shook his head, his deep voice steady. "I fought for you." The chief stepped forward, his staff glowing. He looked at Marcus and then at Lyra, his expression unreadable. At last he spoke. "This is why the bond was given," he said, "not only to bind you, but to give you strength greater than you knew." Marcus stared at Lyra again. She was tiny, fragile, nothing like the soldiers he had fought beside in war, and yet, in the middle of battle, she had stood with him. In that moment, Marcus realized, this bond was not only a trap, it was also a gift. The tribe gathered around them, cheering, raising their glowing crystals high. But Marcus felt something different inside. For the first time, he no longer felt like an outsider. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. Yet even as the cheers filled the air, Marcus knew this was not the end. The raiders would come again, stronger than before, and when they did, he would be ready, because now he had more than a duty. He had someone to protect. The cavern still shook from the battle. Smoke drifted across the stone floor and the smell of blood filled the air. The raiders had been beaten back, their bodies scattered, their war cries fading into the tunnels. The tribe stood together, wounded but alive. For the first time in many seasons, they had won. At the center of it all stood Marcus, the giant human, his body covered in blood and dirt, his breath heavy. Beside him stood Lyra, her small form trembling but unbroken. She had not left his side, even in the darkest moment of the fight. The tribe cheered, their tiny voices rising like a storm of hope. They raised their glowing crystals high, chanting, "His name, human, human, human." The sound echoed through the caverns until it felt like the very walls sang his victory. Marcus looked at them, his heart heavy. He had fought wars before, battles with soldiers, but never had he fought for people so small, so fragile, so desperate. And never had he felt something like this. A bond deeper than duty. The chief stepped forward, his staff glowing bright. His eyes scanned the fallen raiders, then lifted to Marcus. "You see now," the chief said in a deep voice, "why we gave you the bond." Marcus's jaw tightened. He remembered the ceremony, the crown, the moment Lyra was given to him. At first he had thought it was a trick, a trap to bind him. But now, after the battle, he understood. The chief lifted his staff high. "You fought not as a stranger, but as family," he declared. "You fought for her, and through her, you fought for us all." The tribe cheered again, their glowing eyes bright with joy. Marcus turned to look. At Lyra, she stood small beside him, her silver hair messy, her dagger still in her hand. She looked at him with wide eyes, shy but strong. "You saved me," she whispered. Marcus shook his head slowly. "No," he said in his deep voice. "You saved me." Lyra blinked, surprised. Marcus knelt down so his massive frame was closer to her height. His voice softened. "When I crashed here, I thought I was alone. But when they gave you to me, I thought it was a chain. Now I see. It was hope. Her lips curved into the smallest smile. It was not the smile of a child, nor of fear. It was the smile of someone who understood, and for Marcus that was enough. The chief's voice grew serious again. This victory is not the end, he warned. The raiders will return stronger, with more fire and more blades. But now we have a protector who fights as one of us. He looked at Marcus with pride and weight. You are no longer outsider. You are tribe. You are family. The tribe fell silent for a moment, letting the words sink deep. Then cheers rose. Again, louder than ever before, the cavern shook with their joy. But Marcus did not cheer. He simply stood, his hand resting gently on Lyra's shoulder. He had never expected this. Never expected to be part of a people so different, so small, so fragile, and yet, somehow, he belonged. Later, when the fires burned low and the tribe began to rest, Marcus and Lyra sat near the edge of the cavern away from the noise. The silence between them was soft, not heavy. She held her crystal dagger in her lap, tracing its glowing edge with her small fingers. You don't regret it? She asked quietly. Marcus looked down at her. At first I did, he admitted. I thought it was foolish, even cruel. He paused, then smiled faintly. But tonight, no, I don't regret it. Her glowing eyes lifted to his, searching. His face for a moment neither spoke. The silence said everything words could not. Then, in the distance, Marcus heard the faint rumble of thunder outside the caves. He lifted his head listening, but deep inside he knew. It was not thunder. It was the sound of war drums. Far away, growing closer. The raiders would return. This peace would not. Last Marcus clenched his fists, but this time he felt no fear. He had fought for strangers before, but now he had something greater. A tribe to defend, a chief to honor, and a wife, small, fragile, but brave, to protect. He rose to his feet. Towering over the cavern, Lyra looked up at him, her small frame glowing in the dim firelight. What now? She asked softly. Marcus's deep voice rumbled like stone. Now, we prepare. The chief's words echoed in his mind. Family never leaves. Marcus knew the truth now. He was not going anywhere. Not while these people needed him. Not while. Lyra stood at his side. The human had come to the tiny aliens as a stranger. He had defended them, bled for them, and nearly died for them. Now he was bound to them forever. Not by chains, but by something far stronger. Honor, trust, and the bond of family. And as the night deepened in the glowing cavern, Marcus realized one final thing. The galaxy might see him as a soldier, a wanderer, a lost man. But here, to these tiny blue people, he was something more. He was theirs,